people have often asked about the people that we work with as a firm. And one of those firms that we work with is Sony Computer Entertainment. And Phil Harrison has kindly agreed to come along tonight to talk to us about what they do. Sony Computer Entertainment is what we all know as PlayStation. And it's something that we watched grow from a bunch of people sitting in Soho to this worldwide phenomenon. Phil will tell you more about it than he's forgotten more than I'll ever know about computing. My experience of computer games is, oddly enough, first with the AA on a study tour about 30 years ago to Los Angeles, when about 12 of us spent about 3 hours in a laundrette playing paddle tennis when we first saw it on a computer machine. Things have on a pay machine since then. Things have moved on a lot since then. I think the quickest thing, I'm going to skip all the jokes about Dr. Strangelove and Neumann's Nemesis and move straight on to Phil. Phil, I don't want to embarrass him, but he'll be very modest about what he does. As far as we can see as outsiders, he holds the whole thing together and is involved from inception to complete to delivery right around the world of these products, the software mainly, and I believe recently the hardware. But he's going to show you that. Some of the things you're going to see tonight are, as I understand it, not public release things, and they're going to be released to the world in about a week's time, or 2 weeks' time. So if anyone's taking any films, you're not supposed to. Phil Harrison.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you very much to the school for the invitation today to speak. As Keith said, we are PlayStation. I make games for a living, and I've been doing it for more than half my life. And as I keep telling my mum, it'll do until I get a proper job. But as far as I'm concerned, it's been a great career, and I'm just here to speak a little bit about some of the things that we do as it relates to some of the things that you do, and to try and draw some parallels and some convergence points for the future. I'm responsible for our product development, which is creating games for PlayStation formats, whether that's PlayStation, PlayStation 2, or forthcoming machines like PSP and into the next generation. I'm hoping that people here tonight have some passing interest in video games or computer graphics. If not, you're probably in the wrong room. So can I have a quick show of hands who has a PlayStation or knows what PlayStation 2 is all about and has played games recently? And who is more interested in the kind of computer graphics or architectural graphics side of things? Okay, well that's good. I think there's enough hands there. Our product development strategy is that, be first or be best. What that means to me and to my organization is be first in a new genre of game development. Create something that's brand new that the world can admire. Or be best in an existing genre or an existing category and build upon the pantheon of work that has already been created. Another way of looking at it is, why be the fifth best game on the market if there are 4 other products that are already doing it bigger, better, and with more rewarding value to the consumer than your product. And this really informs our product development from creation to final product in everything that we do. And I noticed when looking at your website that there are some similarities. I don't know who wrote this, maybe it was Moisen, but it's as architects we have a primary responsibility to imagine better alternatives to what already exists. Homes, places of work, spaces of leisure, etc. And since we judge our speculations about the future against the past, our imagination necessarily operates in response to the world it both reconfigures and prefigures. Well, I agree with that, and I think that there is a lot of similarity and striving forward to create something new for the world that has a lasting impact on the world. And that's why I think this is a very interesting group of people to learn from, and hopefully in the questions and answers later we can get to learn a bit more about what you do. So I've called this talk Imagining the Best Virtual Spaces for Digital Entertainment, really because I couldn't think of anything other to say, but I thought I'd start first of all with a creative space. This is actually our offices, and I apologise to Keith because normally when architects show photographs of finished offices, I imagine they show them with no people in them and no paper on the desks, and this is a working office, and this is the environment that Keith and his organisation helped create for us. We're rather good at it. We have about 600 people in the UK, and we are the leading creator of games in the UK, and this is what a typical collaborative creative space looks like. Unfortunately, I've shown a rather boring office section. We have great meeting rooms, sound studios, video studios and things like that as well. As I said, about 600 people in our company making games in London, Cambridge and Liverpool, and I thought I'd show you some architecture. There's our London studio, which is on Great Marlborough Street. I was walking down Argyle Street, which is just the back of the Palladium, Thursday of last week, and somebody came up to me and said, "Phil, your studio's on fire." And I said, "Thank you very much, we are doing some good games at the moment." He said, "No, your studio is on fire." And there were 6 fire engines outside our office because a small electrical fire in a sound studio, which was not specified or designed by Fletcher Priest Architects, I should hasten to add, had... The dimmer switch had burnt in the sound studio. It was not a particularly significant fire, but as I arrived there were 6 fire engines outside the office, and the fire crew was just coming out the front door, and one of the guys was carrying this axe in his hand, and I said to him, "Did you use that?" And he said, "That's for me to know and for you to find out." And sure enough, he'd hatcheted our wall down upstairs, but anyway, no damage done. We also have an office in Cambridge. It is probably the ugliest building in Cambridge. This building is interesting because it was the building that was built twice. It was finished, and then they discovered that they'd used the wrong kind of water-resistant or rust-proofing paint on the steelwork, and they had to unbuild it, and it took 10 years of litigation. So although it's a brand new building, and we were the first tenants to move into it, things like the toilets are all designed from like the 80s, so you've got this real kind of retro feel to it, which I don't think works, but some people like it. And then our office up in Liverpool, which is rising there out of the primordial ooze of the car park. This is where we do game development, but it's also where we do game testing. In that building right now are 235 people testing games 17, 18 hours a day on 2 shifts. That's a big organisation for making sure product quality is up to scratch. Typically within a game development studio, this is how our organisation chart works, where we have producers, programmers, artists and designers, and depending on the size and scope of the project, that can be anything from 15 to 60 people, and this is only getting bigger and bigger, and obviously the more people involved for longer, the more expensive the products become, and a little bit about that later. The critical path of game development is really, as you see there, but I've put it into a Gantt chart of very outline type, but this breaks down into many hundreds of thousands of individual elements within the game production. Typically a game now is taking between 2 and 3 years to create, from concept to finished product. If we take a look at one element of one schedule, this is the sound recording schedule of one portion of the commentary from our soccer game. We hire professional commentators to be the commentators in our game, so you can see, if you read the schedule, that we hired Peter Jury and John Barnes to be our commentators, and that's one element of the schedule. And if you zoom out, you can see just the audio schedule, each one of those squares representing a piece of paper that big. So that's just the audio schedule from our soccer game, and that's the entire schedule from our soccer game. So the scope and sophistication of what we're getting involved in now from a project management point of view and a human resource point of view is now getting really quite sophisticated. We are a very new industry and we're just learning these skills. We're only really 25 years old as an industry. Unlike the Hollywood motion picture industry where the metaphors and tools are very well established, each time we go and start a new game, it's the equivalent of Steven Spielberg going out and redesigning the Panavision camera before he shoots a single frame of film. And so we're still trying to overcome these technical hurdles and these human resource hurdles. Games do slip and they do end up being delayed, mainly because of the tools at the end of the fingertips of the creators and the artists and the programmers and the musicians. And as we get better and better tools, we can get more and more predictable in the way we create product. But as it becomes an extremely complicated business, you know, we're talking about very large-scale teams. 70 to 100 people now is quite common when companies are making games for more than one format, perhaps not just PlayStation 2, but other formats as well. As I said, very complex content creation, and a platform that changes about once every 6 or 7 years. You had PlayStation for 5 or 6 years, that was a stable platform, and then along comes PlayStation 2, and in the next 2 or 3 years I'm sure we'll have another platform transition, and that will mean a whole new learning curve and a whole new set of issues to overcome. It's also an incredibly competitive and highly secretive market. Unlike making a building where the plans are public and the architecture perhaps may have been entered into a competition beforehand, our industry is very, very secret, and you can spend 2 years working incredibly hard on what you believe passionately to be the first, and then you go along to a trade show and you see somebody doing it not only first but better than you, and that can be a very demoralizing and distressing part of what we do. It's also a very dynamic market because of the fashion element of our consumer base. Sometimes a game or game type can be very popular one year and then the next year it cannot be so popular. And also the external commercial pressures, price of games or just the overcrowding in the market, always are issues that we have to overcome. However, we're much better at it than some other businesses. This is the Olympic Stadium in Athens. And I share this with you because we have been intimately involved in the creation of the Olympic Stadium. And we finished it first because we are making the official game for the Athens 2004 Olympics. And our game has a roof on. And here's the glass roof on the Olympic Stadium. And we went along. Actually, this photograph was taken in December, to be fair. It is not taken last week. But the roof was very much not on, and it is still very much not on. Nobody could tell us what the big hole in the middle of the stadium is for. And I have no idea whether this is some unique part of the opening ceremony or some particular special effect that they're going to do, or maybe they're going to just rotate the whole stadium as the sun moves around. I don't quite know, but we finished first, and true story, please don't repeat it outside of this room. We took our game over to Lausanne, to the IOC, and we showed them this, and they went, "Oh, so that's what it looks like." And we had a very bizarre meeting where we started off with 3 or 4 people in the room, and then one person would leave and come back with another 2, and then person would go, Johan's got to see this, and run away, and then Johan would come in, and eventually we had the whole board of the IOC and all of the engineering people and all of the design people, and not for the main stadium, but for parts of the events that are indoor, like weightlifting and gymnastics, we followed their design down to the letter, including the colours that they had designed in. We thought they looked awful, but we put them into the game exactly as they prescribed them. They came in and went, that pink's horrible. And then as a result of what we visualized, they have changed the Olympics. So in some small way, I will enjoy watching the weightlifting and knowing that the carpet has changed because of our game. Moving on. Game design. Very similar to the rules that govern architecture. and we have our own rules and our own metaphors that we're still developing. But every game has an entry point and an exit point, I guess, like every building. Every game is involved in navigation and user interface, I guess, just like a building or a workspace or a leisure space. We are equally concerned with movement and flow, getting people around the building and or inside the space for the purposes of 3D navigation. We are intimately concerned with the population and the accommodation of those people, and these terms may not be familiar to you, but these are the terms that we use, and I apologize if they're not exactly analogous to what you do, but the issues that we deal with, the game design issues that we deal with, are not dissimilar to the kind of conversations that we have with Keith and his staff when looking at designing a new space in our offices. Although most real buildings don't have power boost and weapon pickups and secret levels, but perhaps they should. One interesting thing about what we do is the ability for our audience to create content and deliver it back to the world. One phenomenon that has happened in the games industry in the last few years is what's known as the Quake Mod. Is anybody familiar with that expression and what I mean by that? Quake is the preeminent 3D action game on the PC. And the tools that were created by the software developer to build the levels, to build the environments, to build the landscapes that the user enjoys in the game were gifted into the community of users. And it allowed anybody to then create their own worlds and their own mod or modification. And then some of the guys creating the modifications were actually ending up creating even better games than the original. And this spawned a huge community of people. There's now over 600,000 references on Google to Quake game maps, and every possible game type has been recreated using these tools. There's Counter-Strike, which is a particularly famous Quake mod that has now spawned its own mods, even to the point where game designers are now creating characters unique or copying characters unique. There's nothing like watching Homer Simpson running along shooting Marge Simpson in a Simpsons version of Counter-Strike. You do get some very surreal sort of collisions of worlds. But what it ultimately is a very powerful, cheap, in fact, for that read, free set of real-time visualization tools for 3D spaces. And I mention this because some of you may find this interesting for the way that you can cheaply and easily visualize 3D spaces in real time with just a few navigation and mouse clicks. And then obviously with the ability to run around them shooting people. I've just copied a few maps off the internet. This was just like 2 seconds of searching. And this is effectively the designer's view that you would get of a 3D Quake level. For those of you not familiar with first-person shooters, it is what it says on the tin. With a first-person camera perspective, you run around inside this environment using various futuristic or retro weapons, and you play against other real people online over the internet. And what you then do when you join a game is you select the map that you want to play, and then this is a 3D view inside the game level. And they're getting quite sophisticated with some quite rich textures and 3D designs to them. And you can move through this in real time, 60 frames a second, with some really stunning architectural results, which are quite interesting, some of which are very dark and very gothic, but some of which also break the rules. Like, these could never be built in real life. Obviously, this is very curvy, and this actually bends not only space, but time as well, which gets a bit confusing. I don't know what you would call that, neo-grunge classical maybe, or retro gothic, but obviously because of the kind of game it is and the kind of audience that plays it, things tend to use a lot of grey and a lot of brown and a lot of grey-brown. But the lighting can be quite dramatic as well. But this is a real interesting area of evolution that I think there is going to be more and more of as more tools get out into the consumer space. But the games that we create are now going to get a lot more expensive, and this is what I want to talk about now, is what I call the $100 million game. The industry trend in game development is towards hyper-reality. This is taking something in the real world and recreating it in a game world in as realistic a form as possible. In games like the Getaway, which you may be familiar with, sports games, soccer games, football games, racing games, Gran Turismo, WRC, etc., the trend is towards this hyper-reality, and reality is getting extremely expensive. Mainly as the issues I was talking about earlier on, about games getting more complicated than making movies. We made a game a couple of years ago called The Getaway. This cost $12 million to make. It was made right here in London by 55 people in an office in Great Marlborough Street. Took us 3 years. That's about 165 man-years of development. Even though the music and the actors and the locations was actually only just under $1 million, all of that cost is in people. This will seem like great value in the future. And if you look at the historical trend of game development cost, I've chosen for every 5 years as a benchmark and as a data point that some of the games that I've been involved in, the very first one that I was ever involved in 1985, I estimate it cost about $40,000 to make. We didn't actually pay ourselves a salary, but if I had paid me and my 2 friends a salary, I think that we would have probably deserved about $40,000 because we wrote it in 3 months. And games now are taking 3 years and 165 man-years. Ours took 9 man-months to make. And then as time has gone on, certain significant benchmarks have been hit. $10 million with GT3 on PlayStation 2. We're already seeing games costing in excess of $45 million. The last Lord of the Rings game that Electronic Arts put out was significantly over that margin. And in fact, we believe that in one area of the industry already, particularly licensed games, that this barrier has already been broken. It will certainly be broken in the next generation. The Matrix was made into a game, and the license cost would have meant that that game cost over $100 million. So we're already talking about, today, games costing about the same as major Hollywood motion pictures. The big question is, how will we make money out of this, and what will be the impact to developers? Well, what does this really mean? It might mean less titles from fewer companies. It might mean a higher to software hardware ratio. Now, what this means is for each PlayStation game console that we sell about 8 copies or 8 games for each hardware. So each consumer who buys a box, over the lifetime of that box, buys about 8 games on average. Now, that's a bell curve distribution because you've got fanatics who buy 100 games and people join the industry late or join the gaming entertainment late who may only ever buy 1 game, but the average is about 8. So in order to sustain $100 million games, we've got to have a higher software to hardware ratio, perhaps even higher prices, or a much, much bigger installed base and new audiences for games, or most likely all of the above. In order to sustain this exponential increase in cost, this has got to continue. And this is a historical analysis of the number of hardware units sold on a global basis in each year, and the colours represent the generation cycle. Now, this is the term that we use to define the core technology that powers the machine. So the yellow is the 8-bit era, which was things like the Nintendo Entertainment System, things like the Commodore 64, the Spectrum. Don't know if anybody remembers playing on the Spectrum. And then 16-bit Super Nintendo, the Genesis, or the Mega Drive as it was known over here in Europe. And then the dark grey is the PlayStation era, the Nintendo 64 era, and then we're now hard into the blue 128-bit era. And as you can see, each generation cycle has grown this industry exponentially, and in order for us to continue this growth, this has got to continue on a very steep curve. Now, we're already doing pretty well if you compare ourselves to some other major industries and to some other major products. This chart shows the number of years that it took after the product was introduced for a certain critical mass to have been achieved. So you can see that it took about 9 years, 8.5 years, for the Walkman to sell its 3 millionth unit. It took about 9 years for the PC to get to 5 million units. It took the CD player 9 years to get to 8 or 9 million units. And you can see the trends. But PlayStation 2, when it was introduced, took just under a year to get to 10 million units. And this trend, hopefully, gets steeper as time goes on. Now let me look at a practical example of game development. This is a game that we launched last year called WRC3, uniquely the third in the series of WRC games that we'd come out with. And this was a game based on the sport of rallying. The World Rally Championship is a sport that covers 14 countries in a year. It has 8 manufacturers, 24 drivers, and this is one of the original photographic references that we have people who go out to the rallies and they take photographs of the cars, they take photographs of the landscape and give data back to our software developers so that we can recreate it accurately. You can always tell our photographers because every other photographer is taking pictures of the action as the cars come past. Our photographers are photographing the trees and the road and trying to get it accurate as possible. We then take that 3D, that photo reference, and then we make a 3D mesh out of it, combined with the blueprints of the car from the manufacturer. We get a lot of data and a lot of support from the teams themselves. And we then render it into the 3D formats that we use inside the PlayStation 2 until you end up with this, which is the final in-game model. Now, normally, whenever I'm presenting this kind of image to the gaming press or to gaming industries, I'll be trying to explain how fantastic this is and just how groundbreaking this is. And in gaming terms, this is considered very impressive, particularly when you do a comparison from the original to the photo. But you actually have to admit we've got a long way to go if you do a real comparison one to the other. Now, obviously, I'm putting this car here against a white background without any road drawn, but it doesn't really look like real life. In the next generation, this is the image that we will be delivering to our customers, and this is the fidelity of image that they will demand of us. And that requires more people, it requires more time, and it requires better tools. But this is the kind of quality that we will get to. We're already getting pretty close when it comes to the representation of the roads and the stages that you race down. On the right are the 3D in-game screenshots, and on the left is the original photographic reference. So we're already getting pretty close. And we have tools that are now powerful enough to generate 1 million different trees every 60th of a second, and it allows you to populate these worlds very quickly and very realistically. And we're getting quite good at it, but the tools need to get a lot better and be used by an awful lot more people if they are going to be enjoyed, if we're going to make more and more games. So now some more architecture. This is football, is our soccer game series. It's a very competitive genre where recreating every nuance of the sport is key. And we use a lot of real content in the game, famous player faces and famous stadia based on the blueprints. And we also then create our own stadia from our own experience, and we work with a few internationally renowned architectural firms that invent stadia or create stadia. And this is original photographic reference from, does anybody follow football? This is Benfica, if anybody's a big football fan. And then we break it down into its individual 3D components. Sometimes we get the blueprints in 3D from the architects, but more often than not, we just deal with lots of photographs because of copyright issues and kind of proprietary issues. So we start off with that, and then we end up with that, which is not bad. I mean, we're getting pretty good. That's the original photographic reference, and that's the final in-game model that the game takes place in. I mentioned the Getaway earlier on. This was a game that we released last year, or 2 years ago, that's become very successful, where we digitally recreated 45 square kilometres of central London. I don't know how clear this map is, but it's basically the congestion charging map as we foretold it. And we've got Angel Islington in the north up here, Borough Market in the south, Kensington Palace over here, and Shoreditch over here. And we don't have every single road. We have to take some liberties. We couldn't fit everything on the disc that we wanted to. At the time, it was the most ambitious project of its kind. As I said earlier, over 160 man-years in development with 12 million investment. But it's sold over 3 million units worldwide and has generated over 120 million in revenue. Hollywood would kill for this kind of investment to revenue ratio. For them to get a 10x return on investment is almost unheard of, unless you're something like Blair Witch Project. That movie cost $75,000 to make. I don't know how they spent so much. Anyway, back to the Getaway. One of the most risky games we've ever made, but also one of the most profitable. At the time, lauded as one of the most original games, so of course we had to go and make a sequel of it. And the sequel is now under development. And this is some original photographic reference and then some in-game models. The in-game model being the one on the left. It is not a mistake that the hands are not on Big Ben. The reason for that is that actually in the game we put the time correctly on Big Ben. So whatever time it is in the real world, it shows the time correctly on Big Ben, which I thought was a very neat feature. So this is King's Cross and Pancras station there. Rather annoyingly, during the time when we went to collect all of the data, we took about 25,000 reference photographs from various streets around the world. Sorry, around the game world, and about 30 hours of video. We went to St Pancras on one day to take half the pictures. We went back about a week later to take the other half, and they'd covered it in scaffolding in the meantime. So we had to make up bits that we were missing. There's Regent Street, and you can see populated with some traffic. We're not quite as dense as it is in the real world, but we're getting quite close. Getaway sequel comes out later this year, and I've got a little snippet to show you of some of the work in progress. We're going to be premiering this, sorry, horrible American expression, we're going to be showing this for the first time in a week's time at E3, which is our big video game trade show, and I just thought I'd bring a very rough edit straight off the machine to show you a little bit. It is an 18 rated game, so I apologise if some of this content may seem a little extreme, but
as police raided the estate. A Metropolitan spokesman said the incident was an unfortunate but necessary measure.
That's what worries me. Looks like we've got some new contenders.
Mitchell.
They're professionals, let them do their job. Come on.
Something. Oh, where is everyone? London has no idea what's about to hit it.
And then this one here.
So, who's Danny's crew? Bunch of no ones. A boxer, an overweighter, and a bloody caretaker. This job was different. I've got this feeling, you know when something ain't right. It's the biggest thing we've ever done. Look at this woman. You aren't just a boxer. Yeah.
Obviously, this is a very film-like edit, rather than trying to show extended bits of gameplay. We wanted to get across some of the themes and some of the content that's in it. So this is not really representative of how the game plays, but it gives you a sense of the story.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Without any real understanding of the games business to draw the wrong conclusions. Not all games are like that. This is really shown because I wanted to give a sense of the scale of the kind of games that we're involved in making and the kind of detail that goes into their production. Only 2% of the games that are sold are, or 2% of the games that are available are rated 18 or above. Most games are for everybody. But we wanted to make a particularly strong film-like statement with this product, and for those of you that are familiar with the first game, has anybody here played the first game? I hope you agree that this is a pretty substantial improvement on the first one. So what do you think? Yeah, great. Sold one game, that's good. I wanted to now talk a little bit about the future, and in the last 5 or 10 minutes just give a glimpse of where we think things are going. We introduced a product last year called iToy, and this is a device that sits on top of your TV. It's basically a video camera with some additional technology in it that picks up your movement and translates that into the game environment. Rather difficult to explain iToy without showing it, and sadly I didn't bring it along today, but if you haven't seen it, go and check it out. It's just a very cool way of interfacing. If you've seen Minority Report, the movie, where Tom Cruise does all this with his hands, that's basically what iToy is. We see this as just the start of a whole new man-machine interface that will be driven by advanced computers. When you have very high-performance computers interpreting the video image that comes from a camera, you can do an awful lot of things with it. And we're starting to move into gesture recognition interfaces which combine video and audio and movement into one seamless data stream. As the cameras get higher resolution, but also as the computational power gets higher, we'll see a much finer resolution of movement being able to be extracted from this in the future. What we had last year was effectively the hand wave, fairly rough and rudimentary form of interface. By 2008, we predict that we will be able to determine the blink of an eye from a cheap $20 or $30 camera attached to your TV. Where this is going, however, is somewhere very interesting, and we call this emotion capture. It's not a ridiculous concept. Motion capture, for those of you who are familiar with it, is a way of extracting body movement by applying certain markers or light-sensitive material to the actor, and then filming them in such a way that you can extract the 3D information from their body. Emotion capture is extracting how they feel just by looking at them, and you can actually determine an awful lot about somebody's emotional state by their body language, by their physical slumping down in the chair, losing the will to live, like some of you in the audience. But you can then respond to that information in interesting ways, and we're doing a lot of research into this at the moment. I wanted to show you some of these new displays that we're working on in the R&D labs. This is not for kind of public consumption, but just some prototypes of some of the ways that we are going to start representing and displaying data, which you may find quite familiar. We look at the way that data is to be displayed almost like the way that cities are organized and the way that people navigate real 3D spaces. And they are dynamic. They change depending on the amount of data that you have at your disposal, and the way you navigate through them is like navigating a global environment in a kind of internet world, kind of recreating data in a physical, metaphysical way that is very easy for new users to understand. I believe that in 10 years, the concept of typing in a URL like www.something will be as old-fashioned as our parents' generation and their parents when they used to pick up the phone and ask the operator to be put through to Whitehall 231. You know, that concept of communication is completely alien to us now. Mobile phones, you know, you don't actually dial numbers that often because you have them all stored in your mobile phone book. The future of internet communication will completely eliminate the concept of typing in a URL, I believe, and that this is one way that you could imagine this data being represented physically, whether it's music or film data or your personal data like photographs, all in an easy to navigate 3D space, where in fact you may use your gestures to navigate around this, or you may use your voice to select things. We're still working on what works and what doesn't, but we're starting to explore some very interesting areas which I think will inform not just the future of games, but the future of television and the future of computer interfaces as well. I'm not sure which one of these types of data representation we will adopt, or whether we will end up adopting something completely different, but you can just get a sense from this what we're thinking about as we look at different ways of representing data. I really like this. This is a 3D interface for a music player, kind of like an iPod type thing, which has got some really interesting ideas behind it. So where does this really go? Well, this last 5 minutes is a thing called the $1,000 monkey brain, and I'm going to paint a very broad brushstroke image of the future. And this is really about artificial intelligence. When will we get $1,000 worth of monkey brain? And I'll explain what I mean about that in a moment. And I'll talk about a couple of laws that define computer graphics. Moore's law, I don't know whether people are familiar with Moore's law, but this was Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, predicting the inexorable growth of computational power and the reduction in price. Basically, computational power roughly doubling every 18 months and halving in price every 2 years. I think I've got that right in the right way. And when he came up with that law in about 1970, it's actually proven to be bang on ever since. There you go, doubling every 18 months, halving in price every 2 years, and it's been roughly true for the past 30 years, although something called concurrency is now beginning to break the speed limit of Moore's law, which is a computer science technique that had not really been predicted in his early definition of the law. Does anybody know what the definition of Cole's law is? It's chopped and shredded cabbage in a creamy mayonnaise. The Intel 4004 was the world's first microprocessor from 1973, and it had 2,400 transistors in it, and that is a micro photograph of the Intel chip. The Pentium 4, which came out in 2002, had about 60 million transistors on it, and that is an electron microscope picture of an Intel Pentium 4. If you were to plot the original 4004 into the gate space of a 2002 Pentium 4, it would take up that much space. So you're getting a sense of how things are getting incredibly powerful just because of the amount of data. And in fact, even if you know nothing about computer science, you can look at a chip design and you can start to see which bits are the memory. These are the memory here. And then these bits are the logic. This is where all the mathematical algorithms are embedded in hardware. and then this is a cache here. And next year, well, late this year and next year, new 90 nanometer silicon process will start to come on stream, where the gates, the actual electronic components that we put on the chip, are smaller than a flu virus. The flu virus is 120 microns across, and a gate on a next generation chip will be only 50 microns across. So concurrency will mean an exponential increase in computing power, which taps into a distributed network of computers. I'm not going to go into that now, but effectively the only limit to power of computers in the future is the speed of light. There is a fascinating guy called Ray Kurzweil, who, if you're not familiar with his work, go and check out his work and buy his book. I'm not on commission, but he wrote a brilliant book called The Age of Spiritual Machines, and he also has a very interesting website called kurzweilai.net, which if you have any interest in this topic whatsoever, I encourage every one of you to go and check out. And he worked out what you could buy for $1,000 in terms of computational performance. And basically, this was on the y-axis, instructions per second, and time on the x-axis. So in about 1950-something, there was a mechanical computational device that would give you the equivalent of 1 instruction per second. An instruction being a computer instruction or a mathematical computation. And his prediction and the map, or the curve rather, of this growth has been fairly straightforward. Another way of looking at it will be, when will $1,000 worth of computational power buy you a complex intelligent organism's worth of AI? And the answer is quite interesting. If you look at it this way, on this axis you've got storage. So the Library of Congress is about a petaflop of data, about a billion bytes of data. And then on this axis is millions of instructions per second. So you can see, in order to get a human or a whale, we're talking about a petaflop of storage and about a petaflop of instructions per second. Petaflop is a billion floating point operations per second. In 1965, the trend was that we would get there in about 2020. That has since been modified up in 1995 to get there even quicker. And the answer is, you can get $1,000 worth of monkey brain today. It exists now, that cell computing gives you this kind of performance today, and IBM has already recreated this kind of computational power required to get pretty close to the Library of Congress in one room, or a monkey brain. Now, what they're trying to say about the Library of Congress and a monkey brain being equivalent, I'm not quite sure. But the future of what we do in terms of entertainment, and the future of what the world will do in terms of access to computational power, either directly or indirectly by this pervasive computing, is a very interesting space to start dreaming about. And that's what we do all day long, is dream about, when we get this amount of computational power in a device that costs £150, what can we do to entertain the world with it? And that's basically what I do for a living. And thank you very much for your attention.
Phil's kindly agreed to answer questions, so I think you can more than capable of looking after yourself with the questions from the floor. Has anyone got any?
Yes, at the back. We started off hiring artists from a general background. We hire a lot of artists who come out of computer graphic and visualization courses, but perhaps quite general in their skill set. But as we get more sophisticated in the constructions that we're building, we're actually finding that it's better and kind of more high quality result to hire an architect and teach them how to do 3D, rather than to teach somebody who does 3D how to be an architect. I guess that means your value of a career is well defined for the future. We are hiring, by the way, all the time, if anybody's ever interested. If there's, while you're thinking if there's any other questions, I'd like to read you something which you may not be able to see on this screen. I'm going to read you something from Ray Kurzweil's book. And this will just take a minute, but this will give you an idea of what this guy's thinking about. Chapter 9. This is the description of Chapter 9. It's now 2009. A $1,000 personal computer can perform about 1 million calculations per second. Sorry, 1 trillion calculations per second. Computers are embedded in clothing and jewelry. Most routine business transactions take place between a human and a virtual personality. Translating telephones are commonly used. Now just think about that one statement. A mobile phone that translates your conversation in real time, and that's in 2009. That's what he's predicting. Human musicians routinely jam with cybernetic musicians. The neo-Luddite movement is growing. I think that's also very interesting. In 2019, a $1,000 computing device is now approximately equal to the computational ability of the human brain. Computers are now largely invisible and are embedded everywhere. Three-dimensional virtual reality displays embedded in glasses and contact lenses provide the primary interface for communication with other persons, the web, and virtual reality. Most interaction with computing is through gestures and two-way natural language spoken communication. Realistic, all-encompassing visual, auditory, and tactile environments enable people to do virtually anything with anybody, regardless of physical proximity. People are beginning to have relationships with automated personalities as companions, teachers, caretakers, and lovers. Interesting. 2029. Now, 2029 is certainly within my lifetime, yeah, and certainly within my career, probably, hopefully, everybody in this room will still be contributing to the world in 2029. So this is going to happen. A $1,000 unit of computation has the computing capacity of approximately 1,000 human brains. Direct neural pathways have been perfected for high bandwidth connection to the human brain. A range of neural implants is becoming available to enhance visual and auditory perception and interpretation, memory and reasoning. Computers have read all available human and machine-generated literature and multimedia material. There is growing discussions about the legal rights of computers and what constitutes being human. Machines claim to be conscious, and these claims are largely accepted. I should point out that this guy is not considered a crackpot either. The work that he is doing is actually considered on the more conservative scale of some of the predictions of what's going to happen over the next 20 or 30 years in computing. And what that does to the rest of our lives is just going to be fantastic. Sorry, deviation, but is there another question? Or yes? Yes, I certainly can. There you go. KurzweilAI.net. From that website, you will be able to access 2 or 3 other websites of his and dig deeper into his publications and some of the research that he does. Yes?
You're already, sorry for my voice, you're already creating these 3D worlds that
Yes.
are available for everybody. And the way you showed the games were in video mode, is it possible for the player to be able to do these videos research in the future? Like to be able to do your own film or own movie through this world?
Yes, it is. And in fact, it's a very astute observation about another form of entertainment that comes from this. There's a growing underground at the moment, but I think it will become mainstream relatively quickly, called Machinima. That's what they kind of call it on the web, which is taking graphics from games and editing them together to form stories. And there's some really interesting stuff. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Super Mario Brothers, but there's a kind of love story, tragic version of Super Mario Brothers, which is absolutely hysterical. If you go and check it out, it's like, if you just search Machinima, like M-A-C-H-I-N-E-M-A, like cinema and machine joined together on Google, you'll find a whole bunch of places that are doing this. And that's underground and without the sponsor or support of Nintendo or the publisher of the game. But some of the things that we are doing in future will actually empower the game user, the player, to create these things automatically and to share them with other people on the internet as part of their game experience. So it's a very interesting area that we're moving into. Yes?
It's been really fascinating. But there's something that's slightly shocking because I grew up during the era of 1964.
So did I. Yeah.
And I was a big holiday. But there's something sort of, there's a funny discrepancy between this extraordinary computing power and manpower skill that's going into what we call hyper-realism. But, and I know you just sort of there are other genres. I find it interesting that the computer game aspires to sort of realm of style belonging to sort of a movement. And then we get something like The Matrix, which actually does the opposite. But still, is this always, I mean, is it always going to be car chases, football games, and shooting markets? And that's, you know, and that's to do with the sort of, obviously to some extent, the sort of demographic of user end users. What are the points that you made in terms of expansion, the necessity for expanding the market? So expanding, surely that requires some kind of social shift, social. How do you envisage to do that, or do we just get better shooting?
Okay, quite a broad. I'll try and repeat the question for everybody to hear. Basically, will games always be driving, and shooting, football, driving and shooting, or is there something more noble in the art form that is going to grow the market to more people? I think you actually. I've given myself a slightly bad PR just by showing the Getaway. That's not all that we make, and some of the things that we're doing are pushing that kind of art form envelope. However, one of the reasons that people enjoy video gaming is escapism and wish fulfillment. I wish I could be a Formula One driver, therefore I can be one in the virtual world, but not in the real world. Or I want to be David Beckham. No, actually, I don't want to be David Beckham at the moment. I want to be, you know, the leader of a great army, or you know, that kind of wish fulfillment. Unfortunately, lends itself to those kind of products that you were talking about. There was a very serious debate at a big game developers conference in the US in March about, do games make you cry, or can games make you cry? And there was actually a heated debate from the audience about, and it was quite funny because there were these burly game developers saying, well, I played this game and I was crying, and somebody else going, yeah, I cried at that one as well. And there are some stories now, particularly Japanese games, which have got that kind of pure story, perhaps presented in quite a rough way, but pure story that do touch the heartstrings. And the point I made at the beginning about the tools having to get more sophisticated, if we can get bigger and better tools, it means we can draw more people from more disparate walks of life into making games. If we can do that, we can have a more rich creative universe. So it's happening, but not as quickly as I would like.
That's one last.
Is
Is there any attempt to increase an appeal to a female? Which is me making a presumption that these are all games that are aimed at
the best Tekken player in the world is a woman. One of the best game designers that we have on the Getaway is a woman. The script was written by a woman. We are fortunate to have some really highly talented women working in our company in all areas. I believe if we could attract more women to work in game development, we would, by definition, create games that are more attractive to all people, not just the idea of girls' games being made specifically for girls, you know, just making pink games is just offensive. But not just to me, but to women as well. But something like iToy, we've seen that work very well across all genres, all demographics, men, women, girls, boys. We're launching a thing next month, or later this month rather, called SingStar, which is a singing game, which is proving to be, in focus groups, universally well received. There was a question behind you there.
I'm just curious if you ever heard of the
Babylon
Babylon Archive?
Archive.
I was in Berlin 2 weeks ago for the International Media Festival. And it's just
I'm not familiar with it, no.
okay. There was this person presenting this material, and what they do, it was a collage of images from propaganda, from weapon manufacturing, weapon manufacturing. And funny enough, when this collage with the company used in order to sell their video games.
It looked pretty similar.
And it was exactly, the same language, the same narrative, the same way of actually getting the message across. I was just curious if I've heard of it.
No, I'm not familiar with it, but I'll check it out. Cool. Any other questions, or should we? Yeah. We fund our R&D solely ourselves. We do have a number of collaborative projects going on with MIT and some other major research institutes around the world. We also collaborate with companies that would normally be considered our competitors. We have a huge facility in Austin, Texas, which is a joint venture between ourselves, Toshiba and IBM, who independently all compete against each other in different ways, but together we've put about 400 million into developing next generation chips, because each of the three companies can see ways to work together in the future, but also to take those results into their own spaces. As far as the motion capture research is concerned, we're driving it from entertainment within Sony Computer Entertainment under my group, but similar work is being done in probably 4 or 5 other labs around Sony as well. So it will eventually become collaborative.
No more questions? Thanks very, very much. Well, it's really good of you.
Pleasure.